With the break of a new day, the city-sized stadium once again hummed with life. Swarms of spectators flooded in, the undercurrent of their anticipation and excitement almost palpable. Even though the news of the sudden demise of the 4 old nobles had cast a shadow over the tournament, the event was not put on hold. The 3 dukes and the duchess already had successors lined up, but according to Deep Sea Palace's rules, they couldn't assume their roles until the tournament concluded. This left the seats of power empty for the next 6 days, adding to the suspenseful atmosphere. Aditya found himself at the tournament once again. However, today was different. Today, he was in the company of Laura's personal maid, Kate. Kate was well connected, and thanks to her, Aditya had managed to secure VIP seats. He was now comfortably nestled in plush seating, with an unobstructed view of the entire arena. Ladies and gentlemen, a sonorous voice rang out, drowning out the excited chatter of the crowd. It's time for the 5th match of the elimination round. The crowd fell silent, eagerly hanging on to each word. From Group A, we present to you, Laura. A cheer rose from the crowd as Laura, a vision of grace and strength, swam into the arena. And from Group B, we have Triton. Triton, a formidable-looking Selkie, also emerged into the spotlight, greeted with a mixture of cheers and whistles. Let's give them a warm welcome. The announcer's voice echoed, resulting in an uproar of applause and cheers. The crowd was hyped, and the anticipation for the match was at an all-time high. Today is promised to be an unforgettable day. Laura, her every movement as fluid as a water dance. Now, folks, it's time to put your money where your mouth is. Like a tidal wave, the crowd erupted into a frenzy, rushing to stake their bets. Money changed hands at dizzying speed, an atmosphere of reckless, fevered anticipation filling the air. As all this unfolded, Aditya and Kate merely glanced at the frantic, gambling crowd, a detached amusement in their eyes. Neither of them seemed particularly interested in joining the betting pandemonium. Who do you think will win? A bystander couldn't contain his curiosity, addressing the seemingly nonchalant duo. Kate's answer was immediate. Obviously, Laura. The spectator nodded, his eyes reflecting understanding. Betting on Triton would be like throwing away money. The guy's a peak 4th order cultivator, who barely scraped through the group stage. But this is the elimination round. It's a whole different game. It's a battlefield for the most potent and ambitious competitors. Laura's might is undisputed, one of the tournament's absolute powerhouses. Triton's chances of winning against her are less than 0.1%. A different voice chimed in, adding, and let's not forget Triton's defeat in his 3rd group stage match just yesterday. Begin the match. The authoritative voice rang through the arena, resonating with anticipation and high spirits. The moment the announcement ended, Triton, Laura's opponent, mustered all his strength. His focus, determination etched across his features, he began to charge a concentrated beam of energy, aimed at Laura. His every muscle strained, his entire being concentrated on his offensive move. The crowd held its breath, the air alive with anticipation. But Laura, serene as a still sea yet swift as a striking shark, closed the distance between them before Triton's attack could fully form. Before Triton could even blink, she was already before him. There was no time for him to react, to defend or to attack, and her punch, swift and powerful, landed squarely on him. He slumped, crumpled like a felled tree, unconscious before he even hit the ground. The match concludes as quickly as it started. Laura only needed a handful of seconds to establish her victory. What a tremendous display of power. The announcer's voice rang out. The audience, however, was visibly disappointed. 2 burly guards swiftly made their way to the fallen Triton. Well, that was anticlimactic. Minutes turned into hours and the day continued to pass as the rigorous elimination round of the tournament continued. Eventually, the bustling crowd of contestants diminished until only 16 valiant fighters remained. During the fierce and unyielding battles, one particular fighter had piqued Aditya's interest. His matches, just like Laura's, ended in mere seconds. Zephyr could become a thorn in Laura's path, Aditya pondered, his gaze never leaving the merman. On top of all this, Zephyr was an arrogant fighter, his pride as clear as daylight. As dusk cast a veil over the city, Aditya and Kate gradually blended into the dispersing crowd. Days sped by like the fleeting shadows of fish under the sunlit water. As the battles waged and the crowd cheered, only 2 warriors managed to stand their ground. Ladies and gentlemen, here we stand on the 6th day of our grand tournament. Today, we will witness the grand culmination of this unforgettable saga. Today, our champion will rise. At this announcement, an electrifying wave of applause and cheers swept across the spectators. From their vantage point amidst the sea of spectators, Aditya and Kate listened to the announcer's rallying voice with nonchalant expressions. Aditya shook his head slightly, a ripple of disapproval reflecting in his eyes. No offense intended, Kate, he began, his tone hinting at the seriousness of his words, but this whole method of determining the next ruler, it's just absurd, don't you think? Kate looked at Aditya, her eyes revealing a silent curiosity as she chose to listen rather than to challenge his perspective. The monarchy should work on a system of hierarchy, Aditya continued, his voice steady as he outlined his thoughts. It should be a power passed down from parent to child, not something gambled on in a tournament. He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. Strength, while important, should not be the primary qualification for a ruler. A ruler needs vision, intelligence, wisdom, and calmness in the face of adversity. They should have the ability to unite their people, to inspire loyalty and instill a sense of belonging in each citizen. They should be capable of making hard decisions, acting with justice and fairness, and leading with wisdom, not with brute force. This tournament, Aditya gestured broadly towards the arena, is nothing more than a colossal waste of time. Not everyone who steps into this arena possesses the necessary attributes to rule, not everyone is as balanced in their intelligence, wisdom, calmness, and strength as Laura. The demise of your previous ruler can be directly attributed to his arrogance and lack of wisdom. His final words lingered in the air between them, casting a new light on the ongoing spectacle. Kate remained silent, digesting his perspective while around them the crowd continued to cheer, oblivious to their solemn conversation. Aditya rubbed his chin thoughtfully, his eyes still focused on the thrilling spectacle happening within the arena, but his mind clearly elsewhere. I get it, you know, he began, turning his gaze towards Kate. Tradition plays a massive role in the identity of your empire. But I must tell you, not every tradition is beneficial, and some can even be harmful. This tournament, for example, seems to be one such tradition. Kate was quiet, her eyes locked onto Aditya's, captivated by his unconventional viewpoint. She knew it was her duty to defend the traditions of her land, but the sincerity in Aditya's voice made her question. Instead of arguing, she chose to listen. Aditya continued, leaning back in his chair, the casual manner not quite hiding the seriousness of his words. You see, I've noticed that this tournament has a divisive effect on the different races that inhabit your world. It's like an unseen wall that splits the unity of your empire. Let's think about it for a second. How many previous rulers of this empire were aquatic elves? Almost none, right? The throne has been primarily occupied by mermen and mermaids. His words were punctuated by the sounds of the crowd, their cheers and boos providing a fitting background to their somber conversation. Aditya sighed, shaking his head slightly. Honestly, I'm astounded that the Deep Sea Palace is still standing, despite such flawed practices. If similar events were occurring in the land above, your palace would have been invaded and captured multiple times over by now. Kate remained silent, swallowing hard. His words stung because they were true. The unfairness and imbalance were too real and staring right at their faces, and it seemed that she, like many others, had been choosing to ignore it. The echo of Aditya's words left a bitter aftertaste, a hard pill that the maid found herself reluctantly swallowing. From the grand balcony overlooking the underwater city, the view was breathtakingly beautiful, illuminating the unique architecture in the dim aquatic lights. It was here Zephyr found himself on the eve of his impending battle, the finale of the grand tournament, surrounded by his closest confidants. His butler, Joseph, a humble man of mature age with a sincere concern etched on his face, began, Zephyr, your final opponent is no ordinary adversary. It's Laura we are talking about. I'm sure your strength matches hers, but still, it'd be unwise to take the matter lightly. She is full of unexpected tricks, you see. It's crucial that you make the necessary preparations for tomorrow's showdown. Any slight edge can tip the scales in your favor. Zephyr, the strong, muscular merman, flashed a cold, dismissive smile. Joseph, he replied with an air of arrogance, if you utter another word out of turn, I'll make sure you never get the chance to again. The threatening promise dripped with danger, causing Joseph to tremble in fear. My sincerest apologies, Zephyr. I didn't mean to overstep my bounds, but before the silent tension could spread any further, a new voice chimed in from the lavish couch beside Zephyr, but he isn't wrong, you know. Laura is a formidable contender. If you're serious about ruling the Deep Sea Palace, you must prepare for the challenge she presents. Zephyr's eyes momentarily flicked to the source of this unsolicited advice. It was the son of Duke Averon, a man who was more than just an ally. He was the successor to the powerful House Averon, a house that had generously supported Zephyr in his journey to this pivotal point in the tournament. They were close allies, almost like friends. Zephyr gave a nod of acknowledgement before shifting his gaze back to the glimmering cityscape below. A moment of heavy silence followed before Zephyr decided to break it, his voice dripping with subtle sarcasm. Matthew, shouldn't you be in mourning right now? Your father just passed away a few days ago, didn't he? Matthew, the son of Duke Averon and the newly appointed head of the Averon household, smirked in response to Zephyr's question. He shifted his gaze upward, staring at the intricate mosaic patterns adorning the high ceiling as he gathered his thoughts. Why would I mourn the loss of an obstacle? Matthew started, an oddly carefree smile spread across his face, contrasting starkly with the gravity of his words. My father was nothing more than a stone in my path to ascendancy. He clung to his seat of power with such stubbornness despite his advanced age, refusing to step aside. His demise has freed my path to take what rightfully belongs to me, the power, the wealth, the prestige, everything I ever craved is now within my grasp. As Matthew continued to revel in his newfound authority, Zephyr turned his attention to a parchment lying on the nearby table. It was a detailed analysis of Laura's fighting techniques, strengths, and weaknesses. Matthew was taken aback by Zephyr's arrogance. A word of caution lingered at the tip of his tongue, but he bit it back, fearing the wrath of his friend. Scene change _ In the echoing silence of the packed stadium, Zephyr's voice rang out with arrogant bravado. Laura, do you genuinely believe you stand a chance against me? He erupted into a hearty laughter, the sound echoing through the arena. Why don't you just surrender? If you admit defeat now, I can assure these fists of mine won't mar your beautiful face. Laura didn't bother to dignify Zephyr's words with a response. Instead, she lunged towards him, her eyes steely with determination. The enormous, city-sized stadium was almost evenly split in terms of support. As the fight commenced, Laura and Zephyr seemed evenly matched. In the midst of their clash, Laura and Zephyr traded moves, their bodies fluid in motion, their attacks sharp and fast. The battle had been raging on for almost 2 hours now. Perplexed and frustrated, Zephyr's mind raced. How is she so adept at blocking and countering my attacks? I will not lose to Laura. Laura continued to handle his attacks with a composed demeanor. For the first time since the commencement of the grueling battle, a smile touched Laura's lips. Laura had meticulously planned her strategy. Zephyr's frenzied charge abruptly halted. His raging eyes showed a hint of confusion and disbelief. His body swayed and he slurred, How could I lose to you? The stadium went silent for a moment, and then erupted into a frenzy. We have a winner. We have a ruler. Our new empress of the Deep Sea Palace. Her Majesty, Laura. The announcer's voice echoed throughout the venue, stirring the crowd into a thunderous applause. The very next moment, every individual present in the stadium, regardless of their race or status, stood up in acknowledgement of their new ruler. They bowed their heads, showing respect to Laura. The nobles, who had until a moment ago supported Zephyr, had no choice but to grit their teeth and accept this outcome. A woman, Laura, was now their empress, the ruler of the Deep Sea Palace. Really, thank you very much to all those. Presenting to all, our new ruler, Her Majesty. The sonorous voice of the announcer echoed through the vast throne hall, which was bathed in an anticipatory silence. Lining up on both sides of the grand hall, the nobles of the Deep Sea Palace stood, their faces a mixture of intrigue, curiosity, and apprehension. As the grand golden doors at the end of the hall slowly swung open, all eyes were drawn to the figure making her entrance. There she was, Laura, resplendent in her royal attire. A golden crown, a symbol of her new status, sat atop her head, catching the light and gleaming brightly. She held a golden staff, a symbol of her authority, standing tall and proud as the Empress of the Deep Sea Palace. Walking through the parted crowd, she held herself with an air of grace, confidence, and serenity, her gaze never waning. Each step she took towards the throne was met with an increasing silence, the room filled with a sense of awe. As she ascended the steps to the throne, she turned, sitting majestically, and cast a look over everyone present in the hall. Standing to her right were Aditya and Kate. Aditya was looking at Laura with pride twinkling in his eyes and a warm, content smile gracing his lips. In the span of their journey together, he had come to see Laura not just as an ally, but as a dear friend. His heart swelled with genuine happiness witnessing her ascend the throne. Beside him, Kate, usually maintaining a stoic demeanor, had a rare, small smile dancing on her lips. Only 6 months ago, the idea of Laura becoming the next ruler of the Deep Sea Palace would have been met with disbelief and skepticism. Her ideals and progressive views were far from what the nobles cherished. Her strength at the time seemed insufficient to win such a grueling tournament. But within the span of 6 months, so much had changed. Laura had managed to enhance her strength, now standing at the mid-5th order rank. She became the first person who had survived an encounter with the goddess of lust. Despite the overwhelming odds stacked against her, she had persevered, competing with the very best and emerging victorious. She had truly earned her place on the throne and was now the reigning empress of the Deep Sea Palace. Now comes the real test, Laura mused to herself as she absorbed the weight of her new position. Sitting on the throne, she understood that her responsibilities were far from over. On the contrary, they were just beginning. The empire was riddled with corruption that she had to root out. The deeply ingrained issues of racism and discrimination that plagued her subjects had to be eradicated. The overbearing nobles, flaunting their power and authority without restriction, had to be reined in. There were numerous issues, big and small, spread across the empire, all of which required her attention and needed rectification. Her gaze gently drifted towards Aditya, her eyes softening. They were filled with warmth and gratitude as she thought, none of this would have been possible without your help. How can I ever express my gratitude for everything you have done for me? A few observant nobles noticed the way the empress looked at Aditya. Intriguing thoughts and bold hypotheses began to form in their minds, only to be quickly dismissed as they shook their heads, convincing themselves that such scenarios were highly unlikely. Aditya felt her gaze on him and, with a genuinely joyful smile, he acknowledged her with a nod. He was truly delighted to see everything working out for her. As he watched her taking her place on the throne, a sense of accomplishment filled his heart. With this, my mission in the empire is fulfilled. It's time to make my way back, he contemplated quietly. Scene change ________. Why don't you stick around a bit longer? Laura couldn't hide the reluctance in her voice. She had grown accustomed to Aditya's reassuring presence. He had been her pillar of support in these turbulent times and she was hesitant to let him go. If it wasn't for his commitment as the emperor of the Iadaran Empire, she would have loved to appoint him as the new prime minister of the Deep Sea Palace. I truly wish I could, Aditya responded, a tinge of regret in his voice. I've enjoyed my time here immensely. However, there are pressing matters back home that need my attention. The Istaran Empire had only recently emerged victorious from a war. He had left his troops and his generals back home to subdue any remaining rebels in the newly conquered territories. Besides, there were countless other administrative and governance matters to attend to. His dependable Prime Minister Spencer, despite his competence, couldn't possibly handle all the issues on his own. Certain decisions required his personal approval, and any delay in these matters could hamper the development and growth of his empire. I'm going to miss you, Laura admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Kate, standing quietly behind Laura, looked surprised to hear such candid sentiment from her lady. I'll miss you too, Laura. Until our next meeting, Aditya responded, extending his hand towards Laura. With a soft smile, Laura accepted his hand. Their hands met in a firm, friendly handshake, marking their parting. Aditya was escorted by 2 aquatic elves towards the surface. Laura stood at the entrance of the capital, watching his retreating figure. A sense of loneliness washed over her as she saw him leave. Her radiant smile slowly faded, replaced by a look of melancholy. My lady, are you in love with him? Kate, her loyal maid, couldn't resist asking. Laura's cheeks turned a delicate shade of pink. She remained silent, her gaze still fixed on the spot where Aditya had disappeared. Finally, she turned around to head back to the city. The Empress herself had accompanied him to the city entrance, a show of her deep respect and affection. Kate trailed behind Laura, her question left unanswered. Yet, in her heart, she felt she already knew what her lady's response would have been. After Laura and Kate left, a human figure wearing black cloak also walked out of the Sitya and went in Aditya's direction. Hee. Scene change ________. Utilizing the magic of the teleportation array, Aditya found himself in Atlantia, the gateway city to the deep sea palace. Once there, he sought out Narita. Narita was one of the select few that he had planted as spies within the deep sea palace. Narita, I cannot express enough gratitude for the service you've rendered, Aditya said earnestly. You've lived the dangerous and often lonely life of a spy, but that time is now over. You're free to choose where you wish to go from here. You can continue your life here in Atlantia, or you could return to High Harbor City and join the others. It's completely up to you. Narita looked taken aback by the sudden turn of events, but her surprise quickly melted into joy. Thank you, Your Majesty, she replied, her voice choked with emotion. Aditya shook his head gently, rejecting the gratitude. No, Narita, it is I who should be thanking you. I'm well aware that integrating into this deeply prejudiced society wasn't an easy task. You've faced numerous challenges and overcome various obstacles. Your strength and resilience have been invaluable. If you wish, you could leave this place and return to the surface with me. His offer hung in the air, a beacon of hope for a new chapter in Narita's life. Narita, however, gently shook her head, her face lighting up with a warm smile. Your Majesty, during my time here, I've found someone special, she confessed, her cheeks flushing slightly. We're planning our future together. I hope you won't mind if we decide to reside in the Empire? Aditya's response was immediate and reassuring. Of course not, Narita. You're a citizen of the Eastern Empire, and so it will be for your future husband and your family. Your lives, your choices. Before taking his leave, Aditya handed her a bag containing a hefty sum of 10,000 gold coins. It was a significant amount, enough to ensure a comfortable, prosperous life in the High Harbor City for many years to come. It was not just a reward, but a measure of his gratitude for her dedication. If she were wise and used this money to venture into business, she could soon become a woman of considerable wealth. After exchanging heartfelt farewells with Narita, Aditya set his course away from the Deep Sea Palace. However, he didn't return directly to Azure City in the Eastern Empire. Instead, he steered his direction towards another location, a place he had been contemplating visiting for quite some time. Really thank you very much to all those who send support. Nearly 7 months prior, a formidable alliance had taken form. The 14 small kingdoms banded together with Louis, the former king of the Deep Sea Palace, and 2 other powerful third-tier kingdoms. A formidable force was forged with one unified goal, to take down the Eastern Empire. An intimidating army of 1,000,000 strong marched towards the empire, their determination etched on their faces. Yet, it was during this pivotal moment in history that Aditya, the linchpin of the empire, made his move. He single-handedly thwarted the 1,000,000-strong army, demonstrating a level of prowess that left many astounded. More than that, he executed Louis, the previous king of the Deep Sea Palace, sending shockwaves through the ranks of the attacking army. Defeated and outmatched, the 14 small kingdoms, along with the 2 third-tier kingdoms, were subjugated and their lands annexed into the Eastern Empire. This integration resulted in a vast expansion of the empire's territory, sprawling across nearly the entire eastern region of the continent. However, the newly acquired territories of the 14 kingdoms were far from a gem. They were the least developed parts of the region, plagued by constant strife and violence. Poverty was rampant among the populace, with food prices skyrocketing to unaffordable levels. Basic commodities became luxuries, creating a living nightmare for the common people. Security was a luxury they couldn't afford. But, after the Eastern Empire's takeover, things started to change. Aditya, with his vision for a better future, invested heavily in the development of these territories. He practically drained the empire's treasury to uplift the lives of the people, turning their nightmare into a dream of prosperity. 7 months had swept past, and with them came an astounding transformation. The living conditions of the people in the newly integrated territories had seen a monumental improvement. Additionally, the rate of crime, once an ever-present concern, had dropped significantly. It was as if a dark cloud had been lifted, revealing a new dawn of prosperity and peace. Aditya was eager to visit this part of his territories to witness firsthand the fruits of his efforts. He yearned for a bit of solitude, a chance to think and reflect away from the usual clamor of the court. There were other minor reasons for his visit, each contributing to his decision to embark on this journey. Aditya chose not to return to High Harbor City immediately. Instead, he chose to make a stop at a quaint little town nestled along the eastern coastline of the Eastern Empire. From this picturesque location, Aditya planned to travel by air to Mistwood City. This city, one of the largest in the empire, sat right in the heart of the eastern region. Mistwood City was intriguing in its layout. Unlike other parts of the empire that were abundantly dotted with forests and mountains, this region was predominantly filled with expansive farmlands. There was only a small fragment of it covered by forests, which made it safer for the inhabitants. The threat of being attacked by magical beasts, a common fear in other areas, was nearly non-existent here. The people lived their lives in relative peace, their worry significantly reduced by the reassuring protection of the empire. Aditya, under the guise of William, finally reached the bustling city after a journey that seemed to stretch out for 10 minutes. He had last visited this city around 6 months ago, back when it was a poor, underdeveloped shell of its current self. The transformation it had undergone since then was staggering, it now bore the semblance of a prosperous, bustling paradise. He ventured deeper into the city, taking in the sight of the transformed surroundings. As he was soaking in the ambience, a sudden disturbance shattered the tranquility. Out of nowhere, a colossal fist made of raw, pulsating energy materialized in front of him. He barely had time to react before the energy fist slammed into his chest with alarming force, sending him hurtling backward. His body crashed into the side of a nearby building, the impact causing the wall to crack and splinter like a spider's web. Groans of pain escaped his lips as he fought to steady himself. Shaking off the daze, Aditya opened his eyes and caught sight of a woman sauntering towards him with an ominous gleam in her eyes. She spoke, her voice chilling and sinister. "Your Majesty, I've heard tales of the divine dragon blood's immense power. You wouldn't mind me draining every last drop of your blood to enhance my strength, would you?" Taken aback, Aditya responded, his voice icy and severe. "Who are you?" "Well, perhaps introduction should come first," she said with an air of superiority. "I'm known as Vespera, but I wouldn't expect someone as high and mighty as you to know about someone of my humble origins." Aditya's senses were tingling. He recognized that Vespera was a cultivator at the peak of the Fifth Order. In response to her introduction, Aditya quickly composed himself and got up. He locked his gaze on her and queried, "Who sent you here?" His question hung in the air, dense with implications. Vespera let out a soft chuckle, replying, "Your Majesty, too many questions can distract from a good fight." As she finished her sentence, she swiftly waved her right hand. Almost instantaneously, the ground in front of Aditya split open. Emerging from this makeshift chasm were hundreds of shadowy tentacles, all lunging straight towards Aditya. Quick on his feet, Aditya concentrated his strength in his legs and leapt out of the way, landing on the roof of a nearby 5-story house. The shadowy tentacles missed their intended target, instead devastating the entire house upon impact. Vespera's voice then echoed once again, "No one sent me here. I am what they call a rogue cultivator. I don't belong to any particular faction or empire." Aditya stood tall, looking out across the city filled with his people. A sense of responsibility flooded his heart. "What do you want, Vespera? Why bring this fight to the heart of the city?" he questioned, concern lacing his words. He feared the potential destruction of the city, the potential loss of innocent lives. He couldn't allow that to happen. He was their king, their guardian, and it was his duty to ensure their safety. He hoped to resolve the situation peacefully through dialogue, to find out her motivations and negotiate an agreement. Vespera paused for a moment, looking back at him. "Your Majesty, my name is Vespera, and I've been a rogue cultivator for what feels like an eternity, living 1,000 years, she explained, an eerie calmness to her voice. "The select few who have come to know me, refer to me as the enigmatic sorceress. Ever since I was young, I've been in search of two things, omnipotent power and immortality. I have wandered through an endless number of cultures, kingdoms, empires, cities, and across all 7 continents. But to my disappointment, I have yet to find what could grant me the immortality I seek." "But aren't you already near immortal?" Aditya interjected, "Being a peak 5th Order cultivator, you could live for millions of years. You're powerful enough to defeat almost anyone, aren't you?" His words were firm, but the subtle flickering of crimson lightning around his body hinted at an underlying readiness for battle. His eyes transformed, turning red, the pupils narrowing into vertical slits, resembling those of a dragon. Red dragon scales began to materialize on his skin, covering him like a protective armor. The transformation signaled his preparedness for a battle he hoped he wouldn't have to fight. "No, that's not the type of immortality I'm after," Vespera countered, a manic glint lighting up her eyes. "I don't just want to live a long life, I want to transcend the very concept of death. Yes, as cultivators, we might have extended lifespans, but almost all of us, 99.9% as you said, never live out our full life potential. I want to be an immortal that cannot be killed, not just one who lives a long time." Her gaze turned fierce, locking onto Aditya with a fervor that took him aback. "For that, I need your blood. The blood of the legendary divine dragon. You cannot imagine how fortunate I feel to have crossed paths with you in my lifetime. It's as if the heavens themselves have given me a second chance," she continued, her smile broadening into a feral grin. "Your Majesty, your blood is the key to fulfilling my dreams." Aditya's eyebrows knitted together, her desperate excitement sending a chill down his spine. "I'm not just going to hand my blood over to you," he replied evenly, "but if it's death you're so eager to escape from, I can give you that instead." Without wasting a moment, he vanished from Vespera's line of sight. In the blink of an eye, he was behind her, whispering a cold goodbye. From his outstretched palm, he unleashed a wave of crimson flame, the brilliant fire illuminating the impending clash in its ominous glow. "Really thank you very much to all those who sent." In a fraction of a second, before the fiery wave could make contact with Vespera, her physical form seemed to dissolve into nothingness. Aditya's eyes widened in astonishment as the brilliant crimson flames swept through the space she had occupied just moments before. In the next heartbeat, she materialized seemingly out of nowhere, a good 300 meters away from Aditya. She had positioned herself atop the roof of a humble 2-story house, looking down at him with a triumphant grin. "Your Majesty, you're simply not quick enough," she taunted, her voice carrying across the distance between them. Aditya was struck by a surge of disbelief. How did she manage that, he thought, his mind racing. His own speed was something he took pride in, and the thought that this woman could surpass it sent a shiver of apprehension down his spine. "If she truly is faster than me, then I'm in deep trouble," he mused, his mind already calculating possible strategies. With a determined glint in his eyes, Aditya decided to switch tactics. "I need something she can't outrun or dodge," he thought, his gaze fixating on Vespera. A loud, menacing rumble tore through the silence, followed by a swift, dazzling bolt of crimson lightning that plummeted down from the heavens directly towards Vespera. Yet, just as the electrifying attack was about to sear her, she vanished, her grin lingering in the air where she had stood. The crimson bolt hit the target point, instantly reducing the entire house beneath it to rubble and leaving a gaping crater behind. She dodged it, Aditya thought, surprise flickering across his face. How? Quite a show, Vespera's voice echoed from a distance. Now, she was perched atop another house, another 300 meters from her previous spot. Go on, entertain me some more, she dared, her voice dripping with arrogance. Taking her challenge, Aditya decided to unleash a barrage of lightning bolts from the sky, each aiming for Vespera. But each time, just as a bolt was about to make contact, Vespera vanished, evading the attack effortlessly. Witnessing this spectacle, Aditya came to a conclusion. She's not just fast. She's teleporting. But there must be limitations to this power. Aditya was a firm believer that every skill had a weakness. No skill in this world was flawless. Perhaps her teleportation had a limited range, or maybe she needed a cooling period between each teleportation. There was also the possibility that she was using a magical artifact to aid her in teleporting. The potential limitations were endless, and understanding them would be crucial to countering her power. Resolving to uncover the secret behind Vespera's mysterious teleportation ability, Aditya decided to keep her engaged in a relentless battle. He reached into his storage ring and retrieved his treasured adamantite doomblade, the familiar cool touch of the weapon's hilt grounding him. As he grasped the sword, his entire being was cloaked in a vibrant aura of crimson lightning that crackled menacingly around him, amplifying his formidable presence. With a swift, fluid motion, he transformed into a bolt of lightning, closing the distance between him and Vespera in the blink of an eye. He executed a swift, powerful slash with his black blade, aimed diagonally at Vespera, his attack swift and relentless. A resonating clang rang through the air as metal met metal, a shockwave of energy rippling outward. Vespera had managed to counter Aditya's assault, pulling a katana from her own storage ring to block his formidable swing. The sight of their blades clashing, sparks flying in every direction. Aditya continued his offensive, lashing out at Vespera with a flurry of sword strikes. But each time, she managed to either skillfully deflect his sword or nimbly evade his attack. As he swung his sword downwards in a powerful vertical slash, she fluidly sidestepped to the right, avoiding the blow. Undeterred, Aditya swiftly changed his tactic mid-strike. A surge of crimson flame began to spiral around his black sword, as if drawn to it, creating an impressive spectacle. Red lightning flickered along the length of the blade, further enhancing its lethal threat. As Vespera was recovering from her dodge, Aditya abruptly redirected his sword in a diagonal slash aimed directly at her chest. Caught off guard by the sudden change in attack direction, Vespera barely had enough time to react. Aditya's sword sliced through the air, headed straight for her chest. For a moment, shock registered in her eyes. But then, she broke into a triumphant grin. Aditya watched in astonishment as his blade passed cleanly through Vespera's chest, as if she was an illusion. Before he could fully comprehend the situation, Vespera surged forward and delivered a powerful kick to his chest. The force of the blow sent him hurtling backwards like a cannonball. He crashed into the stone wall of the public bath with enough force to cause it to crack like a spider web, the lines radiating outward from the point of impact. Moments later, the building couldn't withstand the impact and collapsed on top of Aditya, a cloud of dust and debris erupting into the air. Bang! With a loud bang, a wave of crimson flame suddenly erupted from the pile of rubble. The intense heat melted the concrete, creating a pathway for Aditya to rise into the air. Dust particles glimmered in the glow of the flame, while he floated above the demolished building. Is her power the ability to become intangible, to phase through solid objects and even living beings? Aditya pondered, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. It was a power he had never come across in his years of training and battling, a skill that was both absurdly rare and incredibly challenging to counter. If his suspicions were correct, then landing even a single blow on her would prove to be an enormously difficult task. I'll have to time my attacks perfectly, strike her in the moments when she becomes solid, he thought to himself. In circumstances like this, he found himself wishing he had abilities that could target the soul directly, like some sort of ethereal, psychic attack. Then he wouldn't have to fret about his opponent possessing the capability to phase through physical attacks. But wishes were merely that, and right now, he had to work with the abilities he did possess. Aditya persistently launched one attack after another, with bolts of crimson lightning crackling from his palms. He tried to get in close, attempting to land a hit through direct combat, but each try ended in failure. He even attempted a distraction strategy, keeping her occupied with his physical attacks while summoning a barrage of lightning from the sky. But none of his attempts seemed to affect her. Vespera's unusual blend of teleportation and phasing abilities was causing him substantial difficulties in the fight. What frustrated Aditya further was Vespera's lack of active engagement. She mostly defended herself, dodging his attacks, phasing through them, or simply teleporting to a new location when he managed to corner her. Her actions were forcing him to continually adapt his attack strategy, pushing him to his limits. Looks like I might have no choice but to use the Dragon Monarch's domain. Aditya thought to himself, the realization slowly sinking in. He was hesitant to use the skill, primarily because of its extreme side effects. Utilizing Dragon Monarch's domain would render him unconscious for several days, leave his body in a weakened state, and require a substantial recovery period. The last time he had used the skill, he had fallen into a deep sleep that lasted for a few days. Now, he found himself with his back against the wall, seeing no other viable strategy to overcome Vespera's unique powers. Suddenly, Aditya's body froze as if someone had pressed a pause button. His muscles refused to obey his commands, and he stood there helplessly, completely immobile. He attempted to fight the paralysis, but it was as if his body was entwined in invisible chains. What on earth is happening? Aditya questioned himself internally, his mind racing to find an explanation for his sudden immobility. Vespera's figure materialized before him, her face a mask of grim seriousness. The time for fun and games is over. It's time to conclude this, she announced, her voice echoing ominously through the still air. In vain, Aditya attempted to respond, but his voice was trapped in his throat, his words as paralyzed as his body. Fear began to creep into his heart, as panic started to bubble up, clouding his thoughts. He was stuck, completely at the mercy of this enigmatic woman, and the vulnerability was terrifying. As Vespera began to close the distance between them, Aditya's eyes sparked with an intense glow. His mind began to replay the events that had occurred so far, desperately seeking any kind of clue or loophole that he could use. His gaze swept over the surrounding area and a realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. Despite their fight taking place in the heart of the city, there were no citizens present. The city felt deserted, utterly devoid of life. His devastating attacks had razed numerous houses to the ground, and yet, the expected uproar of the crowd was eerily absent. It was as if the entire city had been mysteriously emptied. When he extended his senses, trying to feel for any signs of life, he was met with an unsettling void. There were no people, no animals, no insects, nothing. His senses, usually so reliable, were now reaching out into nothingness. The city was devoid of life, a ghost town in the truest sense. Aditya finally realized what her true ability was. Really, thank you very much. Aditya's body started to shake as if he was standing in the midst of an earthquake. This sudden change seemed to catch Vespera by surprise, her eyes widening as she looked at him. His movements were jerky, rough, like an old piece of machinery trying to operate after years of rust and neglect. With every ounce of his remaining strength, he grappled with the adamantite doomblade, his fingers curling around the familiar hilt. His arms moved in a stiff, robotic manner, as if they were fighting against invisible restraints. Then, with a resounding bang, Aditya plunged the blade into his own right thigh. A searing pain ripped through his body as if he'd been hit by a bolt of lightning. But with that wave of pain came a welcome relief, he could move again. The paralyzing force that had imprisoned him was now gone. The sensation of control returning to his body was like tasting fresh air after being trapped underwater. At the same moment, the world around Aditya started to warp and distort. Cracks tore through the air like veins, a sight that was both terrifying and surreal. The world was fragmenting, breaking apart under an unseen force. His blood dripped onto the ground, the red droplets stark against the pavement. His eyes locked with Vespera's, his gaze as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. Then, as if a giant mirror had been shattered, everything around them broke apart. The world splintered and fractured like glass, the shards reflecting the uncertainty and turmoil of the moment. As Aditya reopened his eyes, he found himself back in the familiarity of Mistwood City. This time, however, it was pulsating with life. The absence of the inhabitants had been nothing but a facet of the illusion. I must admit, I didn't think you would manage to shatter my illusion, Vespera remarked, a faint smile playing on her lips. Her words echoed in the still air, revealing the truth behind her abilities. The teleportation, the phasing through matter, all of it had been nothing but illusions woven intricately by her. Being trapped within her web of illusions, Aditya's every attempt at attacking had been deflected with ease. It was as though inside her illusions, Vespera wielded the power of a god, omnipotent and invincible. No harm could come to her unless the illusion was shattered, revealing the reality beneath the illusion. The strength of a peak fifth-order illusion cultivator was indeed formidable. It was a chilling reminder that even the slightest delay in shattering the illusion could have spelled his demise within the fabricated world. The experience served as a stark revelation of the destructive potential lurking within the world of illusions. But do take a moment to glance around yourself, Vespera suggested, her smile curling with a sense of hidden satisfaction. Aditya felt a chill crawling up his spine, and he felt a pressing unease at her words. But when he turned to observe his surroundings, a cold shock hit him. His pupils shrank to pinpricks, his entire body started shaking uncontrollably, and he could feel his breaths becoming quick and shallow. What greeted his eyes was a nightmarish panorama. The vibrant Mistwood City he knew and loved was now nothing but a pile of rubble and debris. Buildings that once touched the sky were now crumbled, reduced to ruins, scattered haphazardly. The city was a ghost of its former self, a devastating spectacle of destruction. But it was not just the city. The lifeless bodies of his own people were strewn around the wreckage, casualties of the catastrophic destruction. There were a handful of survivors who were frantically trying to escape from the doomed city, their terror palpable even from where he stood. Please note, this was not my doing. Nor is it another illusion, Vespera's voice echoed from behind, adding to the horror of the situation. You wreaked this havoc with your own hands, blinded by my illusion. While you thought you were attacking me, you were actually launching your powers on your own city, your own people. Isn't it ironic? So, what's your next move, Dragon Monarch? Vespera continued, her laughter resonating with wicked delight. Her illusion had turned him into a puppet, causing him to unknowingly use his powers, destroying his own city and harming his own people. What monstrous act have I committed? Aditya questioned himself, his heart heavy with remorse. These were his people, citizens of his kingdom. He was their ruler, their protector, the person they placed their trust in. And yet, in a grim twist of fate, he was the one who had reduced their homes to rubble and taken their lives. A profound sense of guilt gnawed at him, making his chest tighten with regret. Suddenly, Vespera's laughter sliced through his introspection. Oh, you think this is the worst part? Let me make this nightmare even more terrifying for you. Her voice dripped with malevolence as she clapped her hands together in delight. As if on cue, the remaining city dwellers, those who had miraculously survived the initial catastrophe, abruptly stopped in their tracks. Their frantic movements stilled and their eyes glazed over, losing their spark of life. It was as if time had frozen them in place. Vespera, what have you done to them? Aditya roared at her, his voice a mixture of fear and fury. His rage was a raging inferno, so powerful it felt like his chest was aflame from within. The intensity of his anger caused wisps of crimson fire to escape from his body, dancing around him like fiery serpents. His normally blue hair began to shift hues, alternating between blue and an angry red. His anger was so intense, he could feel his blood bubbling and boiling within his veins. Vespera's malicious laughter continued to echo in Aditya's ears, each word she spoke further stoking his rising fury. What do you think, Aditya? She teased, her voice gleaming with satisfaction. I've trapped them all in my illusion. Your people are now nothing more than my puppets. Puppets devoid of any feelings or emotions, ready to obey my every command. They're ready to willingly sacrifice their lives at my behest. Would you like a demonstration? Each chilling sentence Vespera uttered acted like fuel to the raging fire of Aditya's anger. He had never experienced such a profound rage in his life. His body reacted to this torrent of fury, discharging violent crimson lightning bolts that crackled menacingly in the air around him. Aditya gritted his teeth, his eyes flaring with a promise of retaliation. If you dare to lay even a finger on them, Vespera, I swear on my divine blood, there will be no escape for you, he growled, his voice thunderous with the force of his oath. Even if you manage to die, I will chase your soul to the farthest corners of existence. I'll make sure you experience eternal torment. As he spoke these powerful words, Aditya's body began to transform rapidly. There was a blinding flash of light, and when it faded, his human form had been replaced by the majestic and fearsome form of a dragon. The air around him crackled with a new intensity, the tension was palpable, and it was clear that the battle was far from over. So, this is your majestic dragon form? Impressive, Vespera observed with a cruel smile, her eyes glinting with amusement. Regrettably, I came today with a singular purpose, to slay the dragon. Listen carefully, Aditya. Make even the slightest move, the smallest aggressive gesture, and your people perish here and now. And I assure you, I'm not joking. Observe. As she finished speaking, she snapped her fingers with a cold, callous grace. Almost instantly, 10 lifeless bodies crumbled to the ground. Each one a chilling reminder of the power she wielded. The sight of this cold-hearted massacre only served to fuel Aditya's fury. Gritting his teeth in both pain and anger, Aditya conceded to her demand, all right. But you must let them go. He found himself cornered, stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he were to try and escape, these innocent lives would be lost. This was an impossible situation. Should he save himself and sacrifice his people, or sacrifice himself to save his people? The next few minutes felt like an endless nightmare for Aditya. Vespera's sharp katana cut into his body repeatedly, each slash reaching his bones and leaving a deep, bleeding wound. Blood spurted from his wounds with each of her brutal attacks. But Aditya, despite the excruciating pain, didn't let out a single scream. He understood that his pain would only serve to amuse her. As the minutes rolled on, his strength waned. He was on the brink of losing consciousness. All route seemed to have been cut off. His situation seemed hopeless, and despair began to consume him. But just when the darkness was about to swallow him, a miraculous twist occurred. Really, thank you very much. Aditya was lying in a small lake of his own blood, a grim testament to the ruthlessness of Vespera's relentless assault. His body was a battlefield, riddled with deep gashes and puncture wounds, each a source of the scarlet river that was slowly leaving his body. The strength was seeping out of him at a terrifying rate and the edges of his vision were starting to blur. He felt the cold, unforgiving hand of unconsciousness slowly descending upon him. Just when the situation was turning unbearably grim and all hope seemed to have evaporated, an unexpected event occurred that momentarily froze the ongoing onslaught. Crack! A deafening sound of splitting echoed throughout the desolate landscape. Aditya, who was on the brink of losing consciousness, managed to muster enough strength to lift his eyelids and glance towards the source of the noise. His tired eyes widened in surprise upon witnessing the enormous fissure opening up in the sky above them. Simultaneously, Vespera's gaze was also riveted to the inexplicable phenomenon in the sky, her face draining of color as shock and disbelief painted her features. No. This is impossible. Her voice echoed in the eerily silent surroundings. At that moment, comprehension dawned upon Aditya as he finally grasped the significance of what was transpiring. However, his body was drained, devoid of any energy to even twitch. Blood loss had left him weak and immobile. Yet the surge of anger that pulsed through his veins was as potent as ever, his hatred for the evil woman before him unabated. He harbored a deep desire to tear her limb from limb, slice her into pieces and let the hungry stray dogs feast on her remains. Crack! The fissures in the world around him grew larger, branching out like a spiderweb spun from fractures. The world as he knew it was cracking, coming apart at the seams. Shatter! Then, with the abruptness of a shattered mirror, the world around him burst apart. The harsh, discordant sound of glass breaking filled his ears, the noise echoing ominously in the quiet. In the next moment, everything around him began to morph and shift, dissolving and disappearing right before his eyes. His city, the people who lived in it, all the familiar surroundings, everything vanished like mirages fading in the desert heat. Are you all right? A soft voice suddenly broke through the silence, gentle yet filled with worry. Tender hands reached out to him, carefully moving the blood-soaked strands of hair away from his right eye and wiping away the sticky blood that coated his face. As his vision cleared, he looked into the face of his unexpected savior. The sight of her brought a wave of surprised recognition. You. Sasha, he whispered, a mix of disbelief and relief in his tone. Of all people, Sasha was the last person he had expected to come to his rescue. Don't talk. Let me help you, she urged, her voice steady and soothing. Without further explanation, she slipped a pill, green and veined, into his mouth. As the pill dissolved, an immediate sensation of healing washed over him, his wounds starting to knit together with a speed that was almost miraculous. Vespera, I'm surprised to stumble upon you here, spoke a second woman who had arrived alongside Sasha. Her tone was cold, her gaze fixed on Vespera with an intensity that made the air around them chill. Vespera, in response, seemed to shrink under the woman's stare. Her body shivered uncontrollably, her complexion turning ashen. Why are you here? She stammered out, her voice shaking with fear. The woman responded with a chilling smile, why am I here? Isn't it obvious? I can't just stand by and let you kill my future son-in-law. Son-in-law, can I? At her words, shock rippled through both Aditya and Vespera. The resemblance between Sasha and this woman too much. Her mother looked slightly maturer than Sasha, but both were equally beautiful. Aditya at first even thought the old woman to be Sasha's big sister. Shaking her head, Sasha's mother turned away from the flabbergasted Vespera and focused her attention on Aditya instead. Gently, she reached out, her fingers trembling as they made contact with his wounded skin. Noticing that her dreaded disease remained dormant, she raised her eyebrows in surprise. Just as Sasha said, the disease doesn't react to Aditya. It only triggers when we come into contact with other males, tormenting us with an unbearable pain, she thought to herself. This discovery brought a wave of relief and joy. Initially, she had been skeptical of her daughter's words and decided to verify them personally. However, they arrived to find Aditya teetering on the edge of death at the hands of Vespera, someone she had let go in the past. It was a startling realization. Vespera, you've crossed a line this time. You almost took the life of my future son-in-law, the woman's voice, that was as frigid as a winter breeze, sent chills down everyone's spine. I don't care for your reasons, but rest assured, you will pay the price. Vespera could only stand and tremble, her legs shaking like autumn leaves in the wind. There was a history between these two women, dating back a decade or so. Lilith, Sasha's mother, had crossed paths with Vespera before. Vespera, desperate and fearful, had pleaded for her life, and Lilith had relented, sparing her with a stern warning. It was a decision she did not expect to revisit so grimly today. With a dismissive flick of her hand, Lilith said, you may die now. Vespera frantically tried to envelop Lilith in one of her illusions, but to no avail. In a blink of an eye, Lilith was right before Vespera. Before Vespera could beg, plead, or utter a single word, a dagger found its way into her heart. Vespera let out a painful cough, a rush of crimson spilling from her mouth as she collapsed to her knees. She looked up at Lilith, who was glaring back at her coldly. I told you before, if you dared to threaten me or my family, there would be no second chances. Lilith's voice was like the chilling Arctic wind, void of any warmth. Then, without a hint of mercy or hesitation, she severed Vespera's head from her body in one swift motion, then nonchalantly kicked her lifeless body aside. Lilith then shifted her focus to Aditya, gently stepping towards him. Thanks to the potent 5-star healing pill Sasha had given him, Aditya's wounds were visibly healing at an accelerated pace. The blood that had once poured out freely was now merely a trickle. The ghastly wounds that Vespera had inflicted were closing up, stitch by invisible stitch. Yet, despite the miraculous recovery, Aditya was fatigued, his body drained from the substantial loss of blood. As Lilith knelt down before Aditya, she was enveloped in a motherly aura. Are you all right, dear? She asked tenderly. Before Aditya could muster the energy to respond, he was pulled into a warm, comforting embrace. He found his face buried in Lilith's ample bosom, almost smothering him. Oh, my dear boy, had we been just a minute later, I shudder to think what might have happened to you, Lilith. Just like her daughter Sasha, Lilith had been burdened with a mysterious illness that made contact with males a torment. Now, the fact that she could touch a man without activating her disease was a novel and joyful experience. Mother, enough with the antics, Sasha exclaimed. Lilith responded to Sasha's words with a playful, mischievous grin, clearly enjoying the situation. Oh, why should I stop, dear, she replied, her voice a teasing lilt. Turning her attention back to Aditya, she leaned in close, her lips just a breath away from his ear. In a voice dripping with sultriness, she whispered, my dear boy, I'm feeling quite hot. Could you lend me a helping hand, please? Aditya's body tensed up as he heard Lilith's words. Her allure was powerful and irresistible. It wasn't some learned trait but an inherent aspect of her being. Every move she made, every word she spoke seemed imbued with a seductive charm. Her whisper sent a jolt through him, making him react like an inexperienced young man, despite his stature as a monarch. Sweetie, I seem to be experiencing a touch of fever. Might you assist me? Lilith murmured in Aditya's ear. The suggestive lilt in her voice was sinfully compelling, almost as if she was the siren's song calling him into temptation. Her whispered words were like tinder to his pent-up desires, sparking a dangerous flame within him. It was well known in this world that dragons, much like the incubi, possessed potent desires of their own. However, Sasha found herself unable to bear the sight. She was consumed by frustration. Jerking Lilith away from Aditya, she shot her an icy glare. Mother, our original purpose has been served. You've ascertained that I wasn't spinning tales. Let's get out of here. This place, it leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. Sasha's voice was frosty as she turned her back on Aditya, her slender shoulders rigid. It was evident to Aditya from her frosty tone and rigid stance that she was still upset with him about his decision to save Laura. She's still seething over that, Aditya realized, a pang of guilt coursing through him. He understood Sasha's anger, but he knew he couldn't have acted otherwise. Now, he needed to find a way to mend the rift between them. But how, he wasn't entirely sure. Meanwhile, Lilith, unfazed by Sasha's icy demeanor, turned her playful gaze back to Aditya. My dear, have you considered tying the knot with my darling daughter? Aditya was left momentarily speechless, taken aback by the directness of Lilith's proposal. Mother. Sasha attempted to cut in, her cheeks flushing in embarrassment, but Lilith seemed hell-bent on saying her piece. Aditya felt a flutter of hesitation in his chest. He was trying to brainstorm ways to mend the rift with Sasha and was deeply grateful to both mother and daughter for coming to his rescue. You see, Sasha and I, we've been inflicted with a peculiar ailment, Lilith revealed, catching Aditya off guard. Hold on. Sasha had mentioned something about me being her chosen one, a gift from the heavens meant for her. Could it be related to this strange disease they are grappling with? Aditya found himself ruminating, his gaze instinctively shifting to Sasha. Sasha, sensing his gaze, averted her eyes with a small huff. Humph. She snorted indignantly, revealing her still simmering annoyance. What ailment are you speaking of? Aditya found himself intrigued, wanting to understand more. Mother, don't spill it. Sasha interjected anxiously, yet Lilith waved her off dismissively. Well, here's the gist of it. Ever since Sasha came into this world, she and I have been plagued with this enigmatic condition, for lack of a better word. We're not entirely certain whether to categorize it as an illness or a disease, but for the sake of this conversation, let's just label it as a disease. Lilith took a deep breath before continuing. Essentially, this disease triggers an adverse reaction in our bodies when we come into physical contact with males. Whenever Sasha or I touch a man, our bodies start revolting, as if on fire from the inside. We cough up blood, and the more prolonged the contact with a male, the more toxic the internal reactions become. This onslaught of toxins weakens us significantly, and if the contact continues for too long, it could potentially be lethal. Lilith's words echoed in the air, heavy with foreboding. Aditya's eyes widened in shock as he absorbed the information. He glanced at Sasha, who responded with a nonchalant snort, refusing to meet his gaze. So that's why she seemed so desperate back then, Aditya thought to himself, pieces of the puzzle slowly beginning to align in his mind. He felt a newfound sense of empathy for the challenges Sasha and her mother must have faced due to this mysterious and potentially fatal condition. Lilith began to walk towards Aditya as she spoke, her eyes reflecting a mix of sorrow and hope. Succubus and incubus are essentially creatures made for sensual gratification and intimate pleasure. Much like a vampire has an innate, unquenchable thirst for blood, our kind cannot endure without indulging in sexual intimacy. You can perhaps comprehend the profound distress and torment that Sasha and I have undergone being unable to so much as touch a man. But the ordeal doesn't end there, she continued, her voice shrouded in melancholy. You see, Sasha and I are not mere succubus. We are what you'd call succubus empresses. This title signifies the pinnacle of what a succubus can ascend to, which means our desires and urges are exponentially more potent than those of an ordinary succubus. As Lilith disclosed these truths, she gently placed her hands on Aditya's shoulders, locking eyes with him. The most horrifying part of all this, she went on, her voice trembling, is that Sasha is destined to perish once she reaches the age of 50, a premature death sentence imposed by this cursed condition. And following closely on her heels, I will meet the same fate. At this point, Lilith leaned into Aditya, resting her head on his shoulder and embracing his waist. Aditya turned his gaze towards Sasha, aware of Lilith's intimate proximity yet too stunned by her revelations to react. Though I've had my fair share of life's experiences, I've made my peace with the prospect of dying, Lilith murmured into his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. But Sasha, my little girl, she still has her whole life ahead of her. My only wish is for her to be free of this curse, to live a life full of joy and happiness. Please, Aditya, would you consider marrying my daughter? Grant her the chance at the normal life she deserves. Her plea hung in the air, laden with despair and hope. Seems like I've just found another reason to take you as my wife, Aditya declared, turning his gaze toward Sasha with a warm, affectionate smile. He had already found himself helplessly drawn to this enigmatic woman, feeling the stirrings of deep romantic interest. However, Sasha promptly retorted, I have no intention of becoming your wife. She snorted dismissively, her cheeks flushed with annoyance as she deliberately averted her eyes from Aditya's intense gaze. Aditya caught sight of Lilith's sympathetic smile. It was clear to him that she too understood her daughter's headstrong nature and acknowledged how challenging it could be to shift Sasha's determined mindset once she had made up her mind. Yet, undeterred, Aditya chuckled and playfully quipped, well, I have a thing for fiery spirits. His voice was filled with warmth and a hint of mischief. His words were simple, but they held an underlying promise that he wasn't going to give up on Sasha, not now, not ever. Could we perhaps have a moment alone? Aditya gently proposed to Lilith, his gaze locked onto Sasha's. His intent was clear, he wanted an opportunity to connect with the headstrong Sasha, hoping to somehow ease the tension between them. However, Lilith immediately retorted, please, don't call me auntie. She lightly pressed her index finger onto his lips, effectively silencing him. She then leaned in, her ample chest pressed provocatively against his, her lips hovering just inches from his ear. In a soft whisper, she suggested, you can call me mother-in-law, or even Lilith if you're more comfortable with that. Aditya couldn't help but realize her deliberate efforts to heighten the physical closeness between them. As he grappled with her seductive charm, Aditya couldn't help but internally acknowledge the unique allure of a succubus empress. Her allure was subtle but powerful, tempting him into forbidden territory. He found himself struggling to maintain control over his thoughts and emotions, caught in her intoxicating web of attraction. Any other man in his place would have been undoubtedly spellbound by her allure. But the most alarming realization was that Lilith wasn't even actively trying to charm him, this was simply her natural aura. Aditya couldn't begin to imagine how irresistible she could be if she were to consciously use her seduction skills. Upon Aditya's request, Lilith, with a knowing smile, faded into the shadows of the surrounding forest, leaving the pair alone. Sasha could feel her heart thudding against her chest as Aditya began to move towards her. A mix of fear, anticipation, and uncertainty fluttered in her stomach. What do you want?" she asked, attempting to keep her voice steady and cold. However, before she could fully react, Aditya swiftly pushed Sasha down onto the soft grassy ground beneath them. Caught completely off guard, Sasha gasped as she landed on her back with a soft thud, the cool earth below contrasting the heat radiating from her body. Aditya then gently positioned himself on top of her, his strong arms framing her head and keeping her in place. The close proximity to Aditya made Sasha's heart beat even faster. Nervousness and a spark of excitement gripped her. Subconsciously, her thighs rubbed together, a telltale sign of her agitation. Sasha could feel her cheeks flushing as Aditya's face hovered a few inches above hers. The world around them seemed to come to a standstill as Aditya paused, their faces just inches apart. His piercing blue eyes met her deep black ones, holding her gaze. There was a level of intensity in his eyes that she had never seen before. It was as if he was trying to communicate his intentions without uttering a word. Sasha found herself lost in his eyes, her breath hitching in her throat. Breaking the silence, Aditya declared in a seductive whisper, "From this moment forward, you are mine, Sasha. You are my wife." His warm breath brushed against her sensitive ear, sending a shiver down her spine. The soft rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets were the only sounds in the otherwise silent night. The glow from the moon above cast a romantic hue over them, adding to the enchantment of the moment. The universe seemed to have conspired to make this moment unforgettable. The intensity of the situation and the passionate declaration left Sasha speechless, her eyes widening in surprise, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of delight. The silence that followed his passionate declaration seemed to stretch out into eternity. Sasha, after regaining some of her composure, averted her eyes and mustered up enough courage to reply, "I refuse. Now, let me go." Her voice was barely a whisper, a soft defiance, but she didn't make an attempt to physically escape his hold. It was as though she was caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, too overwhelmed to act. Aditya, undeterred, gently placed his hand under her chin, tilting her face to look back at him. "This week, you've been quite the handful, Sasha. You've filled my days with endless worries and sleepless nights. It's high time you were held accountable for all the trouble you've caused," he said, a mischievous sparkle in his eyes. As he finished his words, he leaned in, pressing his lips against hers. Hers. In that moment, it felt as if the world came to a standstill. The forest around them fell into an even deeper silence. Sasha's eyes widened in surprise as the sudden touch sent a jolt through her system. His lips were warm and soft, contrasting with the cool night air. Her body involuntarily trembled, a shiver of excitement passing through her. Overwhelmed by a mixture of shock, surprise, and an unfamiliar but pleasant warmth spreading through her, Sasha opened her eyes to look at Aditya. It took a moment for her to process what was happening. Seeing his eyes closed, fully immersed in the kiss, the last remnants of her resistance seemed to melt away. A sensation she had never experienced before blossomed within her, causing her heart to pound in her chest like a wild drum. She slowly closed her eyes and wrapped her arms around his neck, returning the kiss. The taste of him, the feeling of his arms wrapped around her, everything was new, exciting, and breathtaking. This was her first kiss, a special milestone, and in that moment, she couldn't help but feel a sense of deep connection with Aditya. It was a kiss that Sasha would remember for the rest of her life, her first taste of romantic love. Really, thank you very much to all those who sent support with valuable golden tickets. I hope we can. In the hush of the night, time seemed to move at a snail's pace. Each second stretched out luxuriously, and Sasha savored each one. This moment, the intimacy, the warmth, the quiet thrill, it was something she would carry with her forever, etched into the deepest recesses of her heart. Following Aditya's lead, their gentle kiss gradually morphed into something more intense, a passionate French kiss. Aditya's tongue found its way into her mouth, sparking a playful dance with hers. The sensation stoked the fire within her, making her body feel like a furnace. In the past, this feeling of heat was synonymous with pain, a reminder of the peculiar condition she and her mother suffered from. But this time, it was different. The heat was not a torment but a reflection of her yearning to share this closeness with Aditya. It was a warmth that radiated from within her, a flame kindled by her burgeoning feelings for him. They remained locked in their passionate exchange, oblivious to the passage of time. It felt as if they were the only two beings in the world, existing in their bubble of intimacy. When they finally broke apart after what felt like an eternity, Aditya's gaze met Sasha's. His eyes, a captivating shade of blue, were brimming with warmth and affection, a visual testament to his feelings for her. His gaze was so intense, so full of love, that it made her heart flutter in her chest. It was as if he was baring his soul to her, and in that moment, Sasha felt a wave of emotion wash over her, leaving her breathless. The love in his eyes was a balm to her heart, melting any remaining barriers she had erected around it. It was an unforgettable, incredibly romantic moment, one that would remain imprinted on her heart forever. You're such a pervert," Sasha managed to stutter out, her cheeks ablaze with a mix of embarrassment and sheer elation. Her heart was performing somersaults in her chest, pumping a joyous rhythm that matched the thrill coursing through her veins. A small, amused smile tugged at the corners of Aditya's lips upon hearing her comment. He gently teased her, saying, "And here I thought I was dealing with the succubus empress herself. With that, he leaned in again, planting another soft kiss on her lips, effectively silencing any retort she might have had. Sasha's initial surprise faded away as the warmth of his lips once again enveloped hers. Her body responded naturally, instinctively welcoming him. The rhythm of their shared kiss was a symphony of longing and affection. As she relaxed into his arms, Sasha pulled him even closer, wanting to feel every contour of his body pressed against hers, seeking to absorb his warmth. Their passionate kiss felt like an intense dance, one that could have lasted forever. When Aditya eventually shifted his focus from her lips, he trailed a path of kisses along her jawline, eventually landing on her sensitive neck. Each kiss felt like a spark, setting her body aflame, making her gasp and squirm in delight. As his lips navigated her collarbones, leaving a trail of love bites, each one acted as a declaration of his feelings for her. Sasha let out seductive, almost musical moans, the sound echoing in the quiet night. His touch, his kiss, was like a potent drug, intoxicating her, making her yearn for more. This symphony of love, desire, and pleasure was a testament to the bond that was burgeoning between them, and it was an undeniably romantic moment, one that Sasha would cherish in the depths of her heart. However, before they could fully immerse themselves in this realm of passion and desire, a coughing sound abruptly interrupted them. Cough. Cough. Aditya stopped in his tracks, his gaze swiveling to find Lilith, the source of the interruption. A fleeting look of annoyance crossed his face. This was, after all, a moment of intimacy shared between him and Sasha. But her interruption was like a sudden splash of cold water, causing the warmth of the moment to recede. Sasha, too, was feeling the sting of interruption. A frown momentarily creased her beautiful face, a clear sign of her displeasure. However, she quickly smoothed out her expression, trying to mask her disappointment. But the sharp-eyed Lilith didn't miss the brief flicker of displeasure that had crossed her daughter's face. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry for the interruption," Lilith said, though her tone was light and teasing. "However, I thought I should remind you that this might not be the most suitable spot for such intimate activities. If, of course, you both enjoy the idea of an open-air rendezvous, then by all means, carry on." Aditya's eyes widened a bit, realization dawned on him. They were indeed out in the open, in a field just a few kilometers away from the bustling Mistwood city. Their current location didn't exactly scream privacy, and there was a very real chance that an unsuspecting passerby might stumble upon them. It seemed that in the heat of the moment, they had completely overlooked such considerations. The romantic bubble they were in was abruptly popped by reality. Nonetheless, the interruption had only postponed their shared desires, not extinguished them. "Little kitty, I'll have to take my leave now," Aditya spoke, his voice laced with playful mischief. "But don't worry, we'll continue this conversation later." His words ended in a knowing smirk. "Humph. As if I'm waiting," Sasha responded in a defiant tone, hiding the anticipation bubbling inside her. With that, she spun on her heels and began to walk away. Undeterred by her dismissive retort, Aditya called out after her. "Little kitty, I'll come to visit you whenever I have a chance." She didn't respond or turn around, but the corners of her lips curled upward into an almost imperceptible smile. As she departed, Aditya's attention turned back to Lilith, and he quickly noted that her gaze was not on his face. Rather, her eyes were glued to a rather more intimate part of his anatomy. A delicate flush graced her cheeks, and her thighs were rubbing together subtly. It appeared that the scene she had witnessed between him and Sasha had stirred something within her. Unbeknownst to him and Sasha, she had been secretly observing their heated exchange, and it had evoked a passionate response in her. Aditya's eyes met Lilith's again, and he noticed the expectant look in them, a look that seemed to silently ask for something more. He could guess what it was she wanted, but he felt a moment's hesitation. After all, she was Sasha's mother. The line between familial and romantic relationships could be a delicate one to navigate, and he found himself unsure about how to proceed. With measured steps, Lilith closed the gap between herself and Aditya. Her eyes glinted with an unknown emotion as she came to a stop just a few inches away from him. His presence filled her senses, causing her heart to flutter in her chest. "Take good care of yourself," she gently advised, her words floating in the stillness of the moment. "I have a feeling you'll have your hands full in the coming months." Aditya simply nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. There would indeed be countless tasks demanding his attention as he worked on expanding his new territories. With a mischievous glint in her eyes, Lilith produced a small card from her pocket. It was a simple gesture, yet the way she carried it out made his heart pound a little harder in his chest. Teasingly, she slipped the card into his pocket, her fingers lingering just a bit longer than necessary. She traced a line from his pocket up towards his waistband, her touch light as a feather, but it was enough to send a jolt of electric tension through him. Her finger's trail ended perilously close to his groin, causing him to suck in a sharp breath. "This is our address," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can drop by any time. We'll be waiting." The promise in her words sent a shiver down his spine, and he could feel the heat rising within him. His self-restraint was pushed to the edge. Bidding him farewell, Lilith tiptoed, her lips curving into a seductive smile. Before Aditya had a chance to react, she leaned in, brushing her lips against his in a fleeting kiss that ignited a spark of anticipation within him. And then, she was gone, disappearing into the surroundings, leaving Aditya standing alone with the memory of her lingering touch and the taste of her sweet kiss on his lips. As for Vespera's dead body, Lilith had destroyed her body so that no one would know what happened here. For a moment, Aditya remained frozen in the spot where Lilith had left him, her words echoing in his mind, stirring a swirl of emotions within him. It was a complex mix of desire, anticipation, and a hint of apprehension that tugged at the edges of his thoughts. He, however, decided to table those thoughts for later, pushing them to the back of his mind. His gaze drifted toward the distant silhouette of Mistwood City, its outline faintly visible from a few kilometers away. Lilith and Sasha would be using the teleportation array to journey back home, leaving behind the open field that had been the stage for their intimate moments. Aditya let out a soft sigh, the sound lost in the breeze that rustled the nearby leaves. The stillness of the moment seemed to stretch on, allowing him time to gather his thoughts. His fingers traced the pocket where Lilith had slipped the card, a physical reminder of the connection that was gradually forming between them. Time to head home, Aditya murmured to himself. With a blink of an eye, his figure blurred, and in the next second, he was no longer present in the serene field. Like an illusion, Aditya had teleported thousands of kilometers away, back to the grandeur and comfort of his dragon palace. Upon the moment of Aditya's sudden appearance in the living room, an air of surprise swept through the space. Aditya. The names of Julia, Alicia, Ria, and Lara echoed through the room as the quartet rushed towards him, their faces glowing with uncontained joy. Without a moment's hesitation, they launched themselves into Aditya's arms, their bodies tangling together in an affectionate hug. "Welcome home," they chimed in unison, their voices reverberating in the room. "I'm back," Aditya responded, a warmth spreading through his chest as he returned their embrace. His eyes slid shut, taking in the familiar and comforting scent of his beloved fiancées. But the moment was shattered when a suspicious question filled the air. "Wait a minute, why do you have the smell of another girl on your clothes?" The words hung in the air, a tangible tension spreading through the room. Aditya froze. His heart pounded in his chest and his palms began to sweat as he felt the atmosphere drastically change. Gone were the joyful smiles on Julia, Ria, Alicia, and Lara's faces, replaced by cold, eerie smiles that sent shivers down Aditya's spine. I can explain," Aditya stammered, taking a cautious step back, trying to create a safe distance between them. But before he could continue, his body was ensnared by green tendrils of energy. He swallowed hard, his eyes wide with fear as he watched Ria's body glow with an intimidating green aura. Julia, on the other hand, was gazing at Aditya with a smile that was terrifyingly gentle. "You better start explaining now," she cooed. Aditya could feel the beads of perspiration trickling down his forehead. His face had paled, a stark contrast to his usually calm demeanor. A forced chuckle escaped his lips, a clear sign of his nervousness. The corner of his eye twitched, a comedic indication of his sudden descent into danger. Dear valued readers, we've reached another significant milestone. The curtain. Upon Aditya's return from the deep-sea palace, a whirlwind of activities ensued. Everyone became immersed in their respective tasks, especially Aditya, whose plate was more than full. Just a week prior, he had seized control over 3 Western empires and added a substantial tract of land from the northwestern region to his domain. Claiming these new territories was not as simple as merely dispatching troops. Numerous rebel factions had arisen, their defiant cries echoing across the newly acquired lands. Silencing these revolts and reinstating peace was Aditya's foremost priority. After an arduous struggle spanning over 25 days, every major and minor insurgent group was finally suppressed. With the extinguishing of the rebellion flames, the next phase of the mission was initiated, assimilating the freshly won territories into the established fabric of the Eastern Empire. A multitude of tasks, ranging from construction of infrastructure to the establishment of administrative bodies, awaited attention. Over the course of a month, Aditya's treasury saw a hefty expenditure, with more than 1 billion gold coins being funneled into the development of these new lands. The investments were crucial, aimed at elevating the living standards of the citizens and setting up functional governance systems. The formidable expanse of Aditya's empire required an equally robust military force. Recruitment drives for fresh troops commenced just a few days after the Eastern Empire declared victory in the war and claimed the new territories. The underlying aim was to assemble a formidable army, capable of defending the vast stretch of the empire from potential threats. Once the sparks of rebellion were thoroughly doused, the territories were further divided into smaller provinces. This process was carried out meticulously, with Viscount-ranked nobles being appointed to preside over each of these sections. These nobles were entrusted with the responsibility of governing their designated territories and raising their respective armies. This structure was put into place to ensure effective and efficient control over the sprawling empire. Meanwhile, the economy of the empire underwent significant changes. The influx of new territories and their resources led to a diversification of the empire's economic activities. Agriculture, mining, and trade boomed as newly acquired fertile lands, rich mineral deposits, and bustling marketplaces were incorporated into the empire's economy. This unprecedented expansion spurred economic growth, adding to the empire's wealth and prosperity. Aditya's reign was characterized by strategic planning and efficient execution, aiming to shape the empire into a political and economic powerhouse. The development and prosperity of his lands and people remained his primary focus, steering the Eastern Empire on the path to greatness. Aditya held the reins for most of the colossal development schemes, those involving a hefty expenditure of over 1 million gold coins. It wasn't a question of trust when it came to his recently appointed nobles. Rather, it was a matter of expertise. Many of these nobles, fresh from the military ranks, were not steeped in the arts of governance. Their skills lay in strategies of war, not the nuanced navigation of large-scale developmental initiatives. Entrusting them with the mammoth task of judiciously utilizing millions on expansive projects could lead to less than optimal results. During this period, the Eastern Empire was riding the wave of a significant economic surge. The empire's gross domestic product, GDP, skyrocketed, reflecting the health of its burgeoning economy. The recent war had effectively underscored the strength and invincibility of the Eastern Empire. No rival dared to ruffle feathers or foment unrest within the empire's new territories. The intimidating might of the Eastern Empire kept potential troublemakers at bay, ensuring a climate of peace and stability. In line with the rapid advancements, all major and minor cities within the empire were equipped with teleportation arrays. These intricate setups transformed the way people traveled, substantially reducing the time required to traverse vast distances. However, this luxury came at a significant price, rendering it unaffordable for the middle and lower classes. Despite this, the empire's connectivity remained unparalleled. A vast network of roads laced through every nook and cranny of the empire, interconnecting villages, towns, and smaller cities with the empire's bustling metropolises. The lion's share of the 1 billion gold coins earmarked for development was funneled into this intricate web of communication, ensuring that no corner of the empire remained isolated. A substantial portion of the funds was also allocated towards fortifying the empire's security. In an era of rapid expansion and transformation, maintaining the peace and safeguarding the empire's citizens was of paramount importance. An increased focus on defense and law enforcement was vital to the empire's continued growth and prosperity. Thus, under Aditya's strategic guidance, the empire was not only expanding territorially but also flourishing economically and infrastructurally. The people's standard of living was rising, trade was thriving, and the Eastern Empire was steadily charting its course towards an era of unmatched prosperity. State-of-the-art solar cannons were rolled out on an industrial scale. Each city, large or small, became the proud possessor of at least one of these formidable artillery pieces. The solar cannon, with its immense power capable of wounding even a fifth-order cultivator, stood as a symbol of the empire's unwavering commitment to the defense of its people. Not stopping there, Aditya also commissioned an upgrade of the defensive dome barriers that shielded the cities from potential onslaughts. The 3-star barriers were fortified into 4-star barriers, a massive enhancement that further strengthened the empire's defenses. This substantial upgrade was implemented across the board, in every single city of the empire. Despite the hefty expenditure of more than 100 million gold coins, the peace of mind it brought was considered well worth the investment. A full tenth of the empire's budget, a substantial sum of 100 million gold coins, was earmarked for public welfare. A robust network of schools sprang up in every city, both big and small. Basic education for all children became compulsory, underpinning the importance the empire placed on literacy and numeracy. Children were schooled in reading, writing, elementary mathematics, and a selection of other fundamental subjects. For those desiring to delve deeper into specialized fields, universities were established in every region, creating avenues for higher learning and specialization. A significant slice of the budget was dedicated to social initiatives, such as orphanages. In the unforgiving world they lived in, nearly 500,000 children were orphaned each year. The empire stepped in to provide a safety net for these vulnerable youngsters, establishing orphanages where they could be cared for until they reached the age of 16. The empire was also heavily invested in healthcare and housing programs, primarily targeting those at the lowest rung of society. Slums were demolished and replaced with affordable housing, uplifting living conditions for the less privileged. Healthcare facilities were upgraded and expanded, ensuring that every citizen, irrespective of their social or economic status, had access to basic medical services. In essence, the empire, under Aditya's wise leadership, was not only expanding its territorial expanse but was also focusing on the holistic development of its citizenry. It was a time of growth, both in terms of the empire's physical boundaries and the quality of life of its people. An era where the empire's prosperity was reflected not just in its economic indicators, but also in the faces of its contented citizens. Before they knew it, 2.5 months had flown by, each day filled with relentless effort and dedication to the betterment of the Eastern Empire. The year was drawing to a close, with the countdown to the new year now measured in days. Across the vast expanse of the empire, from the northernmost corners to the southernmost tips and from the far reaches of the east to the west, a palpable sense of anticipation hung in the air. Just a fortnight ago, Aditya, the leader of the empire, had made a public announcement that was still ringing in the ears of his citizens. He had proclaimed the reinstatement of the Festival of Eternia, a celebration with roots that stretched back to the early days of the empire. The Festival of Eternia was once a modest celebration, a small spark of joy that brightened the lives of the Eastern Empire's citizens when the empire was but a fledgling presence tucked away in a corner of the eastern region of the dying Al continent. However, within the span of just 1 year, the empire had exploded in size, spreading its influence across the 4 regions of the continent, and planting its flag in every corner. Aditya, in an effort to keep tradition alive amidst this rapid expansion, decided to rekindle the flame of the Festival of Eternia. This festival was a cherished legacy left by the founder of the Eastern Empire, a piece of the empire's history that Aditya believed should be celebrated even as they built their future. He wanted this festival to remind his citizens of their humble beginnings and to give them a moment of unity and joy in their busy lives. The announcement was met with a ripple of excitement that spread through the empire, as every citizen eagerly prepared for the grand celebration of the Festival of Eternia. Really, thank you very much to all those who